Hello everybody, thanks for connecting and welcome to the Geneva Impact Talk, Building for Impact, the Roadmap to Net Zero. My name is Renate and I have the pleasure to be one of the co-founders of the Geneva Macro Labs. I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleague Chiara, who will be directing the Q&A session. Most of you know the Geneva Macro Labs already. We are a do tank that brings leading minds together from the public and the private sector, as well as from civil society, to support sustainable development goals. Our impact talks are supposed to inform impact standards and influence the sustainability debate so that we don't have to invent the impact wheel over and over again. Most of you are frequent webinar participants, so you know that it's important to mute yourself if you're not presenting, and kindly feel free to switch off your video if you don't want to be seen in the video that we are recording. And also, please feel free to use the chat tool to post your questions and comments. And also, some of you already indicated where they're located. We always like to see how international our audience is. I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers. Making the world's biggest producer of building materials an impact frontrunner and laying the foundation for zero carbon cement. That's her challenge. Very happy to have Magali Anderson today. Magali is the Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at LafargeHolcim. She was also appointed as a member of the Group Executive Committee in October 2019. Magali is a mechanical engineer and spent 27 years in the oil and gas industry, mainly with Schlumberger, holding several executive, operational, line and functional roles. Welcome, Magali. Making sustainable development goals local business, that's his mission. Delighted to also welcome Antonio Hautle. Antonio has a background in philosophy and business ethics and administration. Since 2015, he's the executive director of the Global Compact Network, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Before, he was the executive director of the Department of Social Affairs and Society of the State of Lucerne. And before that, he was the director of the development NGO Fastenopfer. What's on the agenda today? So we have 3 questions that we will be addressing. What are the benefits for the private sector to support SDGs? Then we will talk about inclusion and female empowerment. And the last question that we will be addressing is SDGs when vision hits reality. Those of you who know our impact talks know that it will be like a mix of presentation and Q&A. So we will have our speakers presenting, and then we will open for the Q&A, and then have a presentation again and have Q&A again, and then a third block in the same manner. So that's why it is important to post your questions already in the chat so that we can address them during the Q&A, and Chiara will pick them up. Let's now give the floor to our speakers, and Magali and Anthony, welcome again. I'd like to start with the first questions. What are the benefits for the private sector to support SDGs? Antonio, why UN principles can help companies to improve their sustainability approach?
Thank you, Renate. I start with the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. Most of you may be familiar with that. For me, this is the best example to show that the idea to make shared values and principles, as Kofi Annan in 2000 said, can be the basis of sustainable business. The idea is much older. I mean, Aristotle has already started that. We had large debates in the Middle Age, and we theologians and philosophers were asking critical questions to business and economics in the 80s. Today, it's clear we have the UN guiding principles. Before, we had the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact. And in 2015, after the Millennium Development Goals came the Agenda 2030 with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. the thing is quite easy. That's an agenda which is globally more or less shared and accepted. I say more or less. So we do not have to debate whether these 17 SDGs are accepted or not, because the state have accepted it. And I think that is really the strength of our approach. What we tell our companies is, do first responsible business. So do decent business, respecting the 4 pillars of the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, though human rights, the international labor norms, the green economy, today it's Agenda 2030 of Paris, and the anti-corruption norms. That's the ABC of decent and responsible business. And now with the Agenda 2030 added to that, we have in fact the first time in human history an agreement of a large majority of states that these are the challenges of the 21st century, which we have to overcome. And since the private sector is making more or less 60 to 80% of the global wealth creation, who but not the private sector should be or must be in the responsibility together with the civil society and the states. I mean, that's the reason why we're pushing that forward. And that's why we're so happy that companies like LafargeHolcim, yeah, now it's Holcim again, are really pushing this agenda forward. I think it's an agreement we can build on, and that's the big strength of these principles. And I stop here.
Thank you very much, Antonio. That was a very brief statement. I would have given you a little bit more time, but that gives us more time for Q&A later. But Magali, sustainability at executive committee level, why is it so important?
Well, if you take the example of LafargeHolcim, but we can call ourselves Holcim, it has been decided that we are simplifying our names and we will be called Holcim in the very near future. If you look at what has been done over the past, we have decarbonized by 28% since 1990. So it's not like sustainability was not something that was not done. We have a big history. We've been doing a lot of things. But what happened when 1 year and a half ago, the board of directors, together with Jan Jenisch, our CEO, decided to create the chief sustainability officer position. That's how it was created at the start. Then innovation was added later to the role, was really to say, not only to put a strong statement that sustainability is so important to LafargeHolcim that it should be treated at the executive committee level, but it means that the discussion of sustainability is not anymore a side discussion. It's part of every discussion we have on any investment strategy. So it embeds sustainability in everything we do. And I think if we really want, and if you listen to Antonio, what Antonio just said about the wealth that is represented by all the companies, if we really want to see true and accelerated improvement, it can only be by embedded everything you do, sustainability in everything we do. And that's what we have done. So, but also you need the support of the board of directors. So we have a health and safety and sustainability committee that was created quite a while ago, 2017, who I report to at least 5-6 times a year on what we do. They approve our strategy, and of course again the exco. And if you look at the accelerations that we have done in the last 18 months, I think the one that everyone knows is the fact that we were the first company of our sector to join the business ambition for 1.5 degrees scenario with our 2030 target validated by Science Based Targets Initiative. But we have also, in March 2020, Jan Jenisch joined the WBCSD call to action for business leadership in human rights. Just recently, we joined the call for action to eradicate child labor because, as you know, that's the year of doing it. And we have been recognized by external rating companies. We reached A-level climate CDP score for climate and A- for water. We won the Net Zero Carbon Strategy of the Year by the AD Award, etc., etc. I could continue, but what I really want to show, more than making a list of all the achievements we have made, it's really showing that it's not so much that we were doing nothing and suddenly we woke up and said, let's do sustainability. It's really putting together all the talents and all the action that were happening in the company and putting them at the right level of the decision making. And I think that until you do that, you will be really struggling to really be effective in your sustainability journey.
That makes sense. Thank you very much, Magali. We have some questions that accrued already, and I'm handing over to Chiara to direct the Q&A now.
Thank you, Renata, and thank you to Antonio and Magali for those opening statements. One of the first questions, and I think both of you can have a go at this one because it's a really important topic. You know, it's great to hear all of the progress that we've been building up in regards to sustainability and sustainable development, but obviously the past year and some months have thrown an extra kind of challenge to these ongoing agendas, that being COVID-19. So how does COVID affect the implementation of sustainability and net zero roadmaps? I pose this to both of you.
Maybe I can give it a first try, Antonio, just to answer on the LafargeHolcim side. Actually, on LafargeHolcim, it hasn't slowed it down. If you look at everything I just named, are things that were done at the middle of COVID. So I think COVID has been, I call COVID a big, wake up call and a big wave but the climate tsunami is right behind. And I think a lot of people consider it more the wake-up call than something that slowed down. So were there a few investments that were a bit delayed? Because of course, a lot of our sustainability journey requires some investment, such as, I don't know, if you replace fossil fuels by waste, you need to invest in some filters, etc. I would lie if I was saying no. Yes, there's been a few, but it's really much less significant what has been delayed versus what has been accelerated. So in our case, which I think is maybe not a typical case, but I would say it has been a help more than a slowdown.
I would go in the same direction. Our observation is that the COVID crisis has even sharpened the awareness that the triple bottom line, the economic, the social, and the ecological sustainability, so the long-term business has become even more relevant and obvious. All these companies who had only liquidity for some months, they disappeared. And it's clear when the state measures will end, we will see a lot of bankruptcies in Switzerland and abroad. We're just expecting that because they're very low for the moment. So the states are downholding somehow a natural and normal adaptation to the markets. That's one part. What we have observed in the most touched sectors like tourism, that the awareness starts to raise that we have to change certain business models. And probably, I mean, Magali, your industry was on the path already for a long time back because they were so strongly CO2 relevant, they had to do, and you had some scandals and histories in your own company history that you changed the whole system and now are one of the strong forerunners, at least in Switzerland, from my biggest companies, but it's probably counting also for Europe. The biggest challenge I see are the middle-sized, the small and smallest companies, because they have a hard time and they just focus on their economical survival. And oftentimes they do not see how relevant the adaptation to the change in the markets is needed. And after the vote we had in Switzerland on the weekend, I see it also, even the larger population is falling back. Now they start to realize that adaptation to climate change will increase costs for negative impacts, but it will reduce costs and create innovation for the other ones. And this message hasn't yet gone through. And we observe that the smallest and smaller companies are on the way, but not where we need them to be. So I think the COVID crisis has given some shocks, but overall, if we overcome it, it may be in the more developed markets more of a win situation. I'm not that optimistic for Africa because we do not really know what happens there. If we have backslashes, if we are fast enough to really have enough vaccines now, the first world so-called has to be more solid in solidarity with these markets. So for me, it's not clear what will come out in the long run, but at least for our network, we were one of the profit takers. We had never as many companies joining our network as before.
Thank you, Antonio and Magali. It sounds like COVID, in a way, was a bit of an accelerator for sustainable development initiatives across the board. So that is, I guess you could say, a silver lining to everything. But Antonio, the point that you're making about, this could be a challenge for smaller companies and for companies that are in maybe countries that are economically a bit more developing, I guess you could say. How can we deal with this? Well, how can we kind of close that gap for companies who might be on the smaller side, or they're still starting up, or they're in a kind of less industrial country?
I mean, what we try to do together with large companies like Holcim, Nestle, ABB, and others, also the US and European companies, is really to look at the suppliers. The supply chain is very important. And we strongly insist that the large companies do not increase the pressure on the suppliers. Let's say in many supply chains, you have the problem that large companies are imposing pressure on the prices. It's clear. But there we have big challenges. How can large companies help in their supply chain to develop the quality? And if we are speaking of quality, it's the product and the service as such, and the positive and negative ecological and social impacts a product and the service has. And there is still a lot to be done, because especially small middle-sized companies, 250 to 5,000 employees, are in the field where they just delegate the responsibility for ecological sustainability and child labor and the social parts just to their suppliers by putting it into the contract. But we need to really support also the local companies to improve it. And to make the picture a little bit more negative, the disruptions we see in the political field, take Russia, take the tensions between Russia and US and China, Turkey, then you go to the Near East, it's an absolute disaster. You see the situation in Middle America, Mexico, the state is really in difficult situations. So there are big challenges coming up where we have to think how to support these local companies. And again, I think one of the leverages, and that's the field where we can do something as Global Compact together with Holcim and other companies, we have an influence. We can support our local suppliers, etc. Because oftentimes the states are not willing or not able to really support local economies to become more sustainable in social and ecological terms. And that's one of the biggest challenges. It's not the duty of companies to impose human rights in a country. That's the duty of the state. And oftentimes they're failing. And large companies are facing this challenge. How do we work in this context in fragile states, and how do we operate? So they have programs, they do a lot. Some do not enough, let's be clear, but many try to do a lot. And we try to put these companies together and transfer and give this knowledge. I take just one example. Nestle has developed the child labor program, and they're now putting it at the disposal of all companies who are interested in. So these are kind of actions large company can deliver to smaller and local companies.
Thank you so much, Antonio. That was a really, really thoughtful response to that kind of difficult question, so thank you. I'm going to hand it back over to Renata so that we can kick off for the next question.
Thank you very much, Chiara. So our next topic that we will be discussing is about inclusion and female empowerment. And my first question goes to Magali. Diversity, how to uplift female leaders in male-driven industries.
Thank you, Renata. You know, it's one of my favorite topics, and I will try to keep it short because I can talk about it for hours. And here we talk about female leaders, right? Diversity should be much more than just female, but myself, the topic I try to carry around is a gender one. So let's be clear that when I talk about diversity here, I talk about the gender one and not the other. So I think there's many things that companies can do. And one of the first things that they can do is make sure that they portray themselves, that the image that they give to the outside world is the image of an inclusive company. And when I say that, it sounds kind of obvious, but the reality is, if you go to the website of a company and you only see big, muscly men, which frankly, if you were looking at both Lafarge and Holcim pictures of the past, I'm quite sure that's what you would have seen, you know, those guys making cement, they're super strong. And so how would that talk to the standard female? It would talk to me maybe, but maybe not to the standard woman. When you go and recruit people, make sure that the way you write your recruiting ad is inclusive, that everyone feels concerned. Again, the pictures, the way you interview people, make sure that you don't have this bias, which is kind of a natural bias where you would recruit only people like you. So if you only have male leaders, it will be very likely that you will end up having a bias when you recruit a female, because the thing about diversity is it can be a gender thing, but more than a gender thing for me, what is important is changing the leadership style. So it's accepting leadership that is different from the typical examples that we have in front of us, which are very strong leaders, always right, you know, never showing any weaknesses, etc., etc. That's for me is even more important, because that's by bringing that diversity, that you will bring the diversity of thinking and the diversity of acting, which makes companies so much more successful. You know, I'm also in charge of innovation, and if you look at diverse teams are 40% more innovative than non-diverse teams. And again, it's about gender, it's about social background, it's about all of that. Then you have some physical stuff you can do. You can make sure that, for example, in a cement plant, you have proper changing room for ladies, that drivers, female drivers have proper place to proper facilities to rest, etc., etc. Sounds a bit silly, but you wouldn't believe how much problems we encounter just doing that, just because it's not in the original tradition. But once you have done all of that, there's always a topic which is very close to my heart, because I'm a big fan of it, is I am a big fan of quotas. And I know quotas has a bad reputation, so I will call it differently. Setting targets with strong incentive. That means the same, but people like it better. Because at the end, this is how you will get people to get out of their comfort zone, to find a way. So every time you have an excuse, I would like to recruit women, but I can't find them. The moment you give a target with a strong incentive to the person in charge of recruiting, well, kind of by magic, that person suddenly start finding new ways, new talent pools, new ways of, you know, sending women to the universities to explain to the people coming out of the university why it's a great welcoming company for them and why they should come. So we actually did put a target this year to reach 25% women in leadership roles in LafargeHolcim by 2025. You could argue, is it a lot, not a lot? But remember, we are in a company that is traditionally very masculine. So I think for me, it's a very good start. And then, so like I said, it's about creating a culture, creating an inclusive culture where there is no sexism, where you try to cancel the bias as much as we can. And if you want to know more, because I could speak forever, I actually Well, now let me talk first about one initiative that we have, because we talk about leadership, but we need to look at the full spectrum. And there's one initiative we started in LafargeHolcim, which I really like, which is called Women on Wheels. And it's about increasing the number of female truck drivers, because the majority of the truck drivers working for us go home at night. So there's no problem of international transport and would there be the right facilities for people to sleep during the journey? And I think that's a type of job that can be done by everybody, but it's a pure cultural blockage that is not happening. So work for the top, work for leading by example, such as us, where we have now 30% female at the executive committee, but also think about at the workers level, at drivers levels, etc. And finally, if you want to read all the tips on how to increase women in my team, in your team, sorry, I actually have a blog which I write, which is called La Pétroleuse, where I give all kinds of tips on how to increase women in your team in case you don't know how to do it. And
Fantastic.
It's not that difficult.
Thank you, Magali. Antonio, how can companies influence women empowerment and inclusion?
Well, I have to tell the stories from the perspective I am experiencing, and LafargeHolcim is one of the good examples because they have clear programs. They really are aware. And I think the first thing we can do as a network is to create this awareness. And I like what you were saying before, Magali, diversity is leading to success. And it corresponds not only to my experience, but also empirical studies show it. Teams with a strong part of women leadership are better performing than other ones. And for me, it's not astonishing. So what we try to do is really to push the different activities like the women empowerment principles. And we recommend to our members and participants to really subscribe to them, because it's still a long way to go, let's be clear. I mean, in Switzerland, we think we are already advanced. We are not compared to other countries. And if you go to certain cultural areas, it's even much, much worse. Africa, North America, etc. If you go to leadership situation, it's really not where we want to be in the long run. So what we are trying is really to offer these training programs to our participants and change the cultural behavior. And I don't know whether I'm wrong, Magali, but for me, it's the same as we did the debates on sustainability, where we were starting in business ethics in the 80s. That was when I started my license degree on the responsibility of the manager, and the theologians and philosophers and some strange economists were debating that, and all the economists were saying to us, "You're crazy. Economy and business ethics do not go together. They have nothing to do with each other." That has completely changed. And I think it still needs a step forward, that we realize it's important to empower women, to include them, but that it needs also a cultural change in societies. I mean, what is the image we give in schools on technical professions? Is it only for boys, or is it also for girls? So it starts also on that level. What we try to do is really to collaborate as much as we can with women business circles organizations. One example is Women in Sustainable Finance. We just will announce at the beginning of July this collaboration. It's the smallest association, but it's an important step. And what we are now putting up is a board training, 4-hour trainings, where this part is an integral part of the training. And there are 2 women and 2 men who do the training. So a colleague of mine and myself and 2 women in the field. So also to show the board, if the board and the management level is not aware of these issues, nothing will change. But even with this, we will not change the whole picture, because it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And it will take some more time, probably.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio and Magali. I'm handing back to Chiara for the next round of Q&A. Post your questions in the chat now.
Okay, thank you for handing it over, Renata. Thank you again, Magali and Antonio, for answering the second question about women empowerment, obviously a topic that I feel very strongly about as well. And we have 2 questions now that came into the chat. So let me just quickly
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, Jörn had a very comprehensive question, so let me just read it out loud. Female leadership can be enhanced by changing gender roles. Changing gender roles means changing male roles as well. How much do you change male stereotypes, and how much do you support fathers to take paternity leave? Do you encourage them to shift priorities towards their kids? And when women stay responsible for their kids and cannot rely on their fathers to take over responsibility, female empowerment will not work. What do you do for that? So I will hand over that very long question to Magali, and if you need me to repeat any part of it, just let me know.
No, actually, I'm reading it at the same time than you. So no, it's a great question. I think it's a matter of who takes the role is the one who is better fit for it. So in my case, I'm way more ambitious than my husband, and my husband always took a kind of a back step compared to me. And I think he changed way more diapers than I did. Okay, our kids are grown up now, and I have many of my friends whose husbands have stopped work to take care of their kids. So I really think that, you know, the only real difference between a man and a woman is that, to my knowledge, no men have ever been pregnant. I don't, except maybe Schwarzenegger, but even though I'm not sure it was a true movie. But so if you think about it that way, once a kid has been delivered, once the kid is born, then we are both to complete equality. And it's a question of, it's pure cultural and traditional that we say women have a better bonds for education than men. I can tell you in my couple, it's not the case. And we were very happy to together agree with that and agree with changing the traditional roles. But it was not even changing the role, that's how it was. And in the topic of the paternity leave, I am a complete fervent supporter of it, because if you look at women's career, relatively often it's at the moment of the kids that you start seeing the biggest dip, for several reasons. First of all, because during their maternity leave they might miss some progression opportunities, etc. But also because it is assumed, even it's part of all this unconscious bias, it's not necessarily true, but it is assumed that from the moment she has a kid, she will be less dedicated to her job. But we never think of that of men. Now, if the men were also stopping for the paternity leave and creating those bonds with the children, then there wouldn't be any more problem. You would be asking as much the men as or you do as a woman at a recruiting interview, for example, do you want to have babies? Which, by the way, is a forbidden question, but still being asked too often. And I think when I look at the generation of my children who are now in age of having kids themselves, you see that that's happening more and more. This equal duties, if I can call it duties, some people call it duties, some people calling happiness for taking care of kids. I think the new generation, the generation of the 25 to 30, have now integrated that. I think it's more a problem of my generation than the next generation myself.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the political situation still is, Switzerland is still not where we should be. I mean, I was fighting for the crèche. I was president of the local association for 15 years to really push forward. And we were the first ones to have a crèche. Yeah, you say crèche also in English, I think, for children here in the city of Sursee. There was nothing around. And I mean, how do you want to change these models if we don't have also the infrastructure? So Switzerland is still behind. And the question is, what do we do? I mean, in my network, personally, I try to do it in a political context because I'm also there active, and to really create awareness with companies and suggesting them put yourself together to create possibilities, because an SME doesn't have the same possibility as a large company. So it's this checks and balances between the public administration, the services of the state on the one side, and the private ones. And you know, the debate in Switzerland, and it's in other countries and cultures even stronger. Lots of things have changed in Europe, in Switzerland, but for me, it's not enough. It must go on because I think our kids and grandchildren need to have more women in good positions. It will change the face of the economy. It will change the face of societies. And by the way, we need women also in the workspace, because we will have a problem of how you say, the pyramid of the generations, which will be a huge challenge to be resolved. So I agree completely, Magali, with your position, and we have to push it forward. But I would challenge my colleagues in business associations, in politics. We have to go on.
Very good. Thank you, Antonio. Let's move to the third and last round of questions. SDGs when vision hits reality. And my first question goes to Magali. How to implement net zero in a hard-to-abate sector?
So, well, we're not implementing net zero. And net zero is a vision, is long way away. What we are implementing is today and what we will be doing in the next 10 years. I think that's how you have to see it, because vision is good. What you do today is way more important. So we came up that's why when we did our net pledge with business ambition for 1.5 degree scenario, it was very important for me to be backed up by science-based target initiative on our actual target, that they would validate the fact that we had taken a rigorous way of looking at those targets. And between now and 2030, it's only 10 years. And it's we now have the most ambitious target in our sector for 2030. And we have a complete roadmap to do it. And I saw in the chat, there were some previous questions of how we are going to do it and how it's going to cost. So I might as well answer that in the same time. So between now and 2030, really, most of the work will be using what we call traditional levers. In the cement industry, the traditional levers is what we call thermal substitution rate, because 30% of our CO2 comes from the fossil fuel we use to heat up the kiln. And the kiln is where we heat up the limestones, which emit the other 60–70% of CO2 when it's being calcinated. So the first thing we do is replacing that fossil fuel by waste of all kind, by biomass, etc. And we already ran some plants in Europe where we had 100% replacement. And then the second thing we do is what comes out of this kiln is something called clinker. And then we have what we call clinker factor, where we mix that clinker with something else to become the cement. And that clinker factor at global level, we're at 70%, but we have some countries where we are at 20%, 30%. So when the mineral that we put to replace the clinker is carbon neutral, for example, when it's a byproduct of other industries like slag from the steel industries, etc., then it reduces drastically the CO2. So we have a roadmap for 2030 based on those very solid levers that we have had very long experience. So we know exactly what to do, how to do, where to do it. And to answer the question of the cost on these traditional levers, the costs are actually relatively not low, but we have a good return on investment, because when you replace, for example, fossil fuel by waste, you replace your dependency to energy costs, which goes all over the place, as you know, depending on a lot of things, by something that you sometimes get paid for, depending on the countries, because you help the country to get rid of their waste. So it's actually, yes, there is an investment, but there is a really good return on investment short year, so it's very easy. Now, the other thing we are doing right now is to put products on the market, because it's good to have a vision, it's good to take actions, but at the end, what is really important is that people can come and buy green product to do their green construction. So we have launched concrete about 8–9 months ago called Pact. We've launched it first was actually in Germany and Switzerland, and it's now deployed in all regions where we are present and in more than 20 markets. So you can be called Ecopact only if you are 30% CO2 below the average of or below the standard of the country. all the way to 70% and even 100% because we actually offer to compensate for clients who really want to do a net zero construction, what is left. And then we have a cement that is only made in Switzerland. It's called Sustaino. Mm-hmm. And this is where circularity comes in. I didn't yet mention circularity, but we retreat about 46 million tons of waste, which makes us one of the biggest waste treatment company in the world. And Sustaino, what it does is, if you think of a building, so you use concrete to make a building, the building lives its life, and then at the end of its life, and you demolish the building, and you end up with what we call CDW, construction demolition waste. Now you grind it again, make it back into powder, and put it back straight in the cement. And you have done now your Sustaino cement, which has 20% of recycled construction and demolition waste. Why only 20%? Because the norms stop us from going further. And we're working with the Switzerland authorities to try to increase those norms, of course, without jeopardizing the strength and the quality of the cement. You don't want the bridge built with Sustaino to collapse, obviously. And I'm not finger pointing to Switzerland because that's the only country in the world today which is accepting that type of cement. So we are working, you know, Antonio was talking a lot about politics and so on other topics before, but there's a lot of things that could help us going faster if the norms were moving. Norms are very important. Norms, I mean, we need norms. And I'm the first one, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientific, I'm rigorous. I'm the first one to support norms. But innovation is going so fast that we really need norms to evolve at the speed of the innovation. Now, we are also looking at other ways to build, because one way to reduce CO2 is to reduce the amount of concrete you put into what you build. And for that, we do 3D printing. So for example, we can do the fit of the windmills with 3D printing. Not only it's much less concrete, so much less CO2, but also we can make them much stronger and higher, and they can harvest 25% more renewable electricity for the same cost. So, so it's really all these operations that goes together. I didn't mention carbon capture, not because it's not important. We will need carbon capture in the future. It's not in our 2030 target, it will come after. And the reason we didn't put it in our 2030 target is because we know that there's still a lot of work to do to find the right technology and the right cost for carbon capture. And that will require some years of work. And that's why we have about 20 pilots ongoing to do on that. And I would like to mention the last thing. I know I've been a bit long, but it's such a big topic again. I would would like to mention what UNGC is doing under the leadership of Antonio is this program called SDG Accelerator. So some of my team members have participated in the event, and they really absolutely love it. And it's really a great way to support business to accelerate the contribution to SDGs.
Thank you, Magali. Now, Antonio, normally you have like 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
To let us know what is your view on SDGs and vision hits reality. So how to balance new radicalism versus a pragmatic collaboration.
I mean, I like the radicalism of Magali and her company. For me, it's a radical to take it. No, I would rather say take it very serious and take the challenge and the opportunity. I always say, so the SDGs are the business opportunity of the 21st century, because we have so many things. We have a map of all the challenges societies are facing, and businesses can find new ways to produce products and services to give answer to that. That's for me the pragmatic way, and that's what we want to develop with our participants, with universities, etc. And the program Magali was just mentioning, there were now in the first round 800 globally, and there will be a second round now in fall, where we develop with the companies certain strategic steps how to implement the SDGs really in the business operations. What does it concretely mean? And that's what we are pushing. I'm observing somehow a new so-called moralism, which can be dangerous, because I mean, it's clear we need to slow down climate change. We need to slow down and eradicate the CO2 emissions. But if we are doing that against the democratic or the rule of law principles, we get a problem. I do not believe in revolutions, because they destroy, they will not resolve the problem. And I think we have to be careful not to fall down into, I would say, in this radical dogmatic way to approach development and climate change debates. It will not lead to, it will even lead to more disputes and misunderstandings. What we try to do is really to create dialogues based on facts, based on serious respect, mutual respect, and then push these agendas forward. And that's why we are inviting all forces, civil society, political and private sector forces to join the forces. We have enough conflicts, and they will not be reduced in the next 2-3 years, and there will be more crises and more backslashes. And that's why we're really strongly calling for collaboration on a pragmatic way based on respect and human rights. That's really the basis. And that will remain a big challenge, because there are countries who say, okay, we want economic progress and even CO2 reductions and ecological business, but they do not so much care for the human rights agenda. And this challenge will be even stronger in the upcoming years. You know which countries I mean, I don't have to mention them. And that's why I think we as a global network working locally, we have to be aware of these different tendencies and collaborate with all actors on the basis of this idea we want to create a global society where each and every person can live in human dignity by preserving and protecting the environment, or what I rather prefer is the cum-environment. It's not environing us, we are part of this ecosystem. Yeah. And it will survive even if we die, humanity may disappear, it will still exist. So it's also a question of our survival.
Yeah. Thank you. That was almost a 30 seconds last statement. We have time for one more questions, 3 minutes. Yara, I know you can do it. Over to you.
Okay, this is a kind of good segue after this last section, and I will give it to Magali first, because I know you have a hard stop. So basically, you know, the sustainable development question, it's very, very interconnected, and you've mentioned a lot of various efforts, whether it's on the road to net zero or female empowerment. But how do you kind of manage to not lose strategic focus when innovating, when there's all these different, not necessarily mutually exclusive, but different kind of initiatives that fall under the umbrella of sustainable development and innovation?
I mean, it's well, first, women are very good at multitasking, but that's not the answer. I mean, I have obviously several pillars, and each has, in my opinion, complete equal importance. There's one that we talk more about just because the public wants to hear more. Public asks us questions about climate all the time and not so much about other topics, but it doesn't mean we don't treat them equally important. But I would go further than that. For me, they are completely interlinked. You can't say one doesn't impact the other. So, for example, we are just about to issue our new human rights policy, and we have revised our salient issues. And one of the top salient issues of salient risks, salient risk of our human rights policy is climate risk, because climate risk is a human, it's a people risk. It's not so much a climate risk. If you think of biodiversity is an excellent way to store CO2. We store CO2 in trees, but also when you design built environment, we should contribute to design built environment and that include biodiversity space. So today we have a concrete, and someone asked about e-concrete in Israel. We know them very well. We actually had the ongoing collaboration in Germany with them, and unfortunately Shemrit passed away. We have a concrete that you put inside the ocean that develop reefs, where reefs are happy to be. So for me, I wouldn't be exclusive. They actually work together, and it's my job to make all those links. So no, there's no prioritization problems where one would suffer from the other.
Thank you so much. I believe you have to run off soon, Magali, but thank you so much for joining this talk. It was a pleasure to have you here and to hear the awesome insights and innovation that's happening at LafargeHolcim. So thank you again, and looking forward to hopefully keeping this conversation going.
Thank you, Magali. And we will go on with another question for Antonio.
So I will leave you then. Thank you very much for having me.
Magali,
I'm sorry.
Thank
see
you.
Soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so Antonio, would you also do you have a response to this question on kind of, you know, how do we address the interconnectedness of it all and make sure that we don't let one kind of initiative fall behind in comparison to others?
Yeah, I have oftentimes the debate with NGOs, but even with certain business initiatives, just focusing on the SDGs. And I say, okay, that's interesting, but for many companies to start there is difficult. Because there are so many aspects, and a private sector actor, company needs a business case to engage. They need to make profit at the end of the day to pay their bills, etc. And what we really try to show them is the connection between the principles, we call it these 4 pillars we were mentioning, and the economic success, so the quality of the product and services, the quality of their way to produce, process management, etc. And then the connection to the social and environmental issues. And I think this, if companies or people within companies realize that making profit and being ecologically and socially sustainable is not a contradiction, then we can make a step forward. And it's for me all about this balance between the 3 dimensions. And it's clear in crisis, you may need more reserves. So in good times, you put aside some money to be able to survive and not to just fire all your stuff if the company is getting into troubles. So it's for me, this triple bottom line is a very good example for businesses. That's a very good way, a method to think about their strategy, their missions, and their operations and how they do it. And just a last remark, I didn't mention that yet. The side of the investors start to realize that more and more. Some of you here in Switzerland may have seen the last report of Swiss Sustainable Finance. It came out last week, and it showed we had again an increase of ESG, so somehow sustainable investment, by more than 30% last year. And since 2015, it really went up. It's more than 400 times more than before. We are now over 30% of the overall assets are invested in so-called sustainable assets, where the 3 dimensions at least are at the core of the debate. How good the qualities is still to be debated. But we have a shift in awareness, and companies do good in taking this shift serious. Because we say clearly the future of companies is sustainable, or there will not be any more in the market. And that is probably the strongest motivator for a businessman to do that. And he may or she may add then all the other aspects too, hopefully. But I think the driver from the investor side will be stronger in the next years. That was also one of the questions above. Is that profitable? Yes, sustainability definitely is the most profitable way to do business. And all these companies who do not want to realize that they will disappear in the next 20 years.
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. I think, like you mentioned, a couple people had asked that question earlier, because I think that's an ongoing dilemma, right? That we're trying to solve. How do we kind of address this seeming contradiction, although it's a bit old school, but this contradiction between sustainable development and private sector interests. But I think your explanation was really spot on. And I think that pretty much wraps up the question and answer session. We're coming up to the last 5 minutes of our talk. So Renata, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that Michele's question was well addressed. Okay, Michele is saying yes. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you, Antonio. It was, as usual, a very that's the agenda that we had all the 3 questions that we were addressing. We talked about the benefits for the private sector, and Antonio, I really liked your last statement. It was almost like the 30 seconds. Sustainability is, let's say, the most important driver for growth and revenue, and I like this one. Thank you. So if you want to stay in touch with us, you can do that via these channels. Please reach out to us. We have our website, and I think Marianne is also posting the URLs. If you want to know more about what we are doing, if you want to become a member of the Geneva Marco Labs, what we would really appreciate, because then we could also include you a little bit more into our activities. Feel free to drop us a mail. Or also follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we will be publishing this video in a short while. And what's happening next? We will have, of course, very soon our summer break, but there will be a last online talk on the 30th of June, and it will be about the future of work. And some of you might have seen our conference that we had recently about the future of work, and it will be about the clash of human values and algorithms, the workers of the future. So if this is topic that is interesting for you, please join us on the 30th of June for our next online talk. In the meantime, please stay healthy, have a very good evening, have a very good week, and I look forward to seeing you soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks. Have a good time.
Thank you, Antonio,
have a good
for
evening.
Your presentation. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you.
I go for a swim now.
Very good. I went for a swim at noon. The water is really good.
I will go. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.